Good evening. Tonight we're just going to be talking a little bit about Greatsword. I have some gameplay running in the background. A fun fact, this is actually from the first week of Jaehyun's release, maybe 3 days in or something like that. I'm playing against Remy, one of my good friends, as he was streaming. And yeah, I've been holding on to this footage for a long time because I've been planning on making this video, but things just got in the way and you know how things go. So today we're going to be talking about my thoughts on Greatsword. I think it's one of the strongest weapons in Brawlhalla right now, but it has some weird things about it that I think could be tweaked or adjusted to not only make it feel more natural, but make it feel more balanced. I don't know if balanced is the right word, but I mean, you'll see. So, as it stands right now, Greatsword is the newest weapon in Brawlhalla, with completely unique functions. So rather than just having 3 grounded attacks, Endlight, Sidelight, Downlight, it has Endlight, Sidelight, Downlight, but then it has different variants of them depending on which hit you use. So let's say you do an Endlight into an Endlight, like I did right there. You notice the Endlight, the first one had that white glow, the second one had a red trail, and that's what's known as a finisher. So every single one of those moves, Endlight, Sidelight, Downlight, has a bridge version and a finisher version. Think of it like 1, 2, 3, ABC, or like, I don't even know, stoplights. You got green, then you got yellow, then you got red. If you think about green as the opener, yellow as the mid, and then red as the finisher. So the way that it functions is essentially you are locked into using one of your moves. So let's say you do an Endlight. In order to do the fastest possible action, you would need to do an attack right away, or a jump or something like that, but you cannot turn around and attack. So the way that the weapon seems to be designed is that you punish it from going around, and it is incredibly strong if you are facing it. At least that seems to be the theory behind it, in my opinion. And in practice, that seems to work some of the time, but because of the low recovery time, and you see that coverage of that Jaehyun Ensig, in practice it becomes a little bit harder to effectively do that, and I think some change that could happen is the amount of time that it takes for a bridge move to recover should be a little bit longer. I think it's a nice mix-up. Let's say you whiff your starter, that's cool. What does your opponent do? Well, maybe they anticipate the bridge coming up next, try and punish that. But as it stands right now, if you whiff your bridge, you are completely safe and able to just escape the situation entirely. Very difficult to punish a Greatsword whiff because you don't really know if they're going to escape, or if they're going to throw out a signature, or if they're going to throw out a bridge or a finisher. So I think added recovery time in between something like a bridge, especially sidelight into downlight, I think that one is the hardest to punish by far in neutral. It's very, very easy to throw it out and not get punished yourself. So I think that could use some tweaking. But the other thing is that the aerials also contribute to the stance. So let's say you land with a down air, you are locked into the down starter. It's as if it's a down starter. And after that, let's say you do a down attack, that'll be a down finisher. Or if you do a side attack, that'll be a side bridge. And that I think is a very cool mechanic. I think it's very unique. It's very cool. The fact that all 3 of the aerials have grounded versions. I don't think there's another weapon in the game that has that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm 99.9% sure. Probably should know that, but no, there's no way. There's no other weapon that has that. But as it stands right now, those grounded aerials are kind of not very good. And this is why I say the weapon kind of feels weirdly broken, in the sense that it has some super strong strengths. Its ability to keep you on the ground and keep you guessing and not really able to punish, as well as its aerial juggles, which you see a little bit in this game, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But then at the same time, it feels incredibly weak sometimes. Landing with a grounded Nair feels super sluggish, super awful, and it really makes you not really want to use the move at all. Landing with a grounded Nair is one of the most fluid and quick moves in the entire kit, but when you land on it, you're kind of just rooted in place, stuck, you can't really do much. So that is definitely something that I think could use some tweaking to the fluidity of the weapon for grounded aerials to not have as much recovery time, or at least operate a little bit differently. I think on Nair, a different force angle could definitely be a positive change, because if you land a grounded Nair, you really aren't getting anything off of it, despite being locked into a stance where you're expected to follow up. A grounded dare, I think, is the best of the 3, but you notice in that situation where I dared right next to the platform, I could have held the down air, and if I held it, then I would have stuck into the platform, and that's not a position you want to be in. So you notice when I use dare, I'm using it a little bit higher than the stage, because the amount of space that you need in between the stage and where you use it is pretty high, because you just get suctioned in down there if you use a down air close enough to the stage, like you saw right there. So I think that's some thing that could also use tweaking is, I don't know exactly how the collision detection works for determining whether an aerial will be grounded or whether it will be an aerial version of it, but I think it's a bit too harsh at the moment, or at least it feels harsh because you feel so rooted when you use grounded aerials. So I do think grounded aerials could use a massive change, maybe not massive, but I would say major buff, whereas some of the grounded options and a move like nair and recovery could use some nerfs. I can explain a little bit. I just said for a little while. I was kind of just looking at the gameplay. Again, it's been a long time since I've looked at this. But yeah, talking about the control that Greatsword has, because I think that's really the strength of the weapon, is control. So as I was describing earlier, it is very difficult to punish this weapon on the ground, and ground control seems to be its style because of how much space it can cover. I don't know why I'm like running out of breath as I'm speaking. Let me just... There we go. But the thing is, it also has incredible air control. So I was describing how you kind of refrain a little bit from using Sair close to the ground and Dare close to the ground, but Dare above the ground, like off stage or a couple jump heights, is incredibly strong. It's like a Spear Dare, but better, which is kind of crazy because Spear Dare is one of the best moves in the game. I wouldn't say it's like just strictly better. That's a bit of an over exaggeration or generalization, but it's incredibly strong. You see just how safe I am throwing that out. I can cover my landing so well. And then nair. I think nair is one of, speaking of best moves in the game, I mean, okay, you saw Dare strength right there off stage as well. Nair paired with recovery gives Greatsword just so much air control. Trying to recover, okay, so here's the thing, right? Let's say, maybe I shouldn't say let's say and give you this whole hypothetical. I should just explain things in simple terms. This is something I've been realizing about myself. I tend to over-explain sometimes, and then I confuse myself, so I'm going to try and stop doing that. Basically, if the way to play against Greatsword is to cross them up, which is basically the term for going around them to try and punish, then it kind of would make sense if nair is that kind of option to say get off me, like don't go above me, because it's super quick, it can knock them away, and let's say you do an end light and the opponent tries to jump around you, you can just throw it in there. That makes sense. I think that's some of the idea behind the quickness of that move, but as it stands right now, I feel like it is just way too strong. Its speed, its force, like everything about this move is just insane. The hitbox, it has a hitbox behind you and above you and like to the right of you, I guess if you're facing to the right, and to the left of you if you're facing to the left, but it's kind of like a 180-degree super fast slap that also kills, and I think that move is just a little bit too strong as it stands right now. I feel like I said as it stands right now like 3 times now, but that is how it stands. I do believe. Yeah, I think that could use some adjustments. I think the back hitbox could use a force reduction, and I think it would be a kind of a cool thing if it had you know how the Greatsword starters, they don't have variable force? If the backside of the nair also had something like 0 variable force, I think that would be something cool. Maybe not 0, but it could leave the window open for more creativity and really depth in the weapon. Let's say you want to get a bit of a punish and extra added damage from a nair, you could do a reverse nair and then do something after that. So I think that would be a little bit cool. I also think it could use a bit of cooldown, because you can just kind of toss it out and then toss it out and then toss it out again, and maybe that's something that Dare could use as well, although I'm not really sure about that. But I think where nair really shines is where it's paired with recovery, because nair on its own, fantastic move, but it doesn't have the biggest vertical range. It has a lot of horizontal range, but vertical range, it's lacking a little bit, which is fine, that's the design of the move. But what is not lacking vertical range whatsoever is that recovery. You just see how huge the hitbox is, how Remy has to play around it, because if he didn't dodge that recovery, that would have clipped from underneath. And I think that is definitely something that could use some adjustments. The amount of force on the recovery and the hitbox is ginormous. And keep in mind, by the way, I probably should have prefaced the video with this, I love Greatsword. I think it's so much fun to play. It simultaneously feels like a heavy weapon and a string weapon, which is, like, by game design standpoint, that is very impressive. I'm very impressed. It's very fluid and lots of fun to play. But again, it's kind of weird. It feels clunky at times and incredibly smooth at times. And I think that could be definitely adjusted or changed with some of the adjustments that I'm thinking of. But then again, I'm not a game dev. I don't know anything about balance or what it's like to live in that office. So, you know, don't take my word for it. But yeah, I probably should have prefaced with that. I love Greatsword. So these are like changes that I think would be more healthy for it, because as I almost said as it stands, I think it's one of the strongest weapons right now, once again. But yeah, talking a little bit about Greatsword paired with Jaehyun, I think something that that should definitely be considered is that Jaehyun's signatures, not on sword, although I could have like a whole topic on his sword sigs because those things are kind of crazy, but his Greatsword signatures complement the weapon perfectly. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you whiff something like a side light or a side light down light, you can cover yourself with a signature. The signature I'm talking about is N-Sig. That thing is humongous, so much force, incredibly fast, which is surprising with how much hitbox coverage it has. I think that move could definitely use some startup. The side sig, the hitbox is ginormous. I think a lot of people sleep on it, but I actually think side sig might be his better sig on the Greatsword, better than N-Sig. Maybe not, I don't know, but that hitbox is ginormous, and it kills super early. Speaking of killing super early, that's another thing I wanted to talk about, is, man, those finishers, some of those finishers, they kill a little bit too early, mayhaps. I do know there was a patch a couple weeks ago where they toned down a couple of them, but, it's still looking a bit beefy. I do think a couple of them could be toned down. I also think that some of the usage of different bridges, they become more and more obsolete as the player gets better and better against the Greatsword, because something like an N-Light into side light, for example, is jumpable. And if the player knows that, or if your opponent knows that, you're not really going to be able to land something like that. But, yeah. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. His signatures complement the kit perfectly, because something like a side light into an N-Sig just covers so much, or a side light down light into N-Sig, an N-Light into N-Sig, and just because the weapon is partly designed for you to go around it, to have a signature that just covers this crescent moon above you is such a huge asset to Jaehyun's kit. And I'm not saying that that is something that should be removed, not at all. I think that's completely fine. But as it stands, I said it again, I need to stop. I think it's a bit too quick. It's a bit too oppressive. And again, I'm saying that as someone who has put a lot of time into Greatsword and who enjoys it a lot. I do think that it would benefit not necessarily Jaehyun players, but I think it would benefit the game more if he felt a little less oppressive to play against and a little more fun to play, because I think that's what opening up options like grounded aerials being a more viable thing to use would do, because right now it feels like you're restricted because you don't want to just stick into the ground like glue whenever you use an aerial close to the ground, like I did just there. I was kind of just frozen in place, and it doesn't feel very good. And you kind of have to hold yourself back from using attacks that you would want to use in those situations, just because not because you don't think it'll hit or because you'll get punished or something like that. But even if you do hit it, the punish you'll get, especially with a grounded Nair, feels super underwhelming and really not worth it. So I think adjusting grounded aerials, and you see right there the strength of the N-Sig and how much space it covers. I think adjusting the grounded aerials will add fluidity, and then toning down the ground game a little bit to compensate for the buff in aerial game, I think is fair. As well as not limiting, but reducing the power of the juggles with a bit of nair force reduction maybe. But honestly, maybe nair doesn't need to be changed. Maybe recovery is the biggest problem here, because I think recovery's hitbox paired with its force is a bit ludicrous. It's kind of crazy to me. If you take a look at the hitboxes in training mode, they are a bit lardo is the way I would put it. But yeah, those are my general thoughts on Greatsword. I will, just leave this game on. I'm not gonna stop talking. I'm not gonna stop commenting. But those are kind of the general thoughts that I have. I think it's in a super strong state right now. I like the term broken, I think, gets thrown around and kind of loses its meaning a little bit. The way I think about Greatsword right now is, yes, I would say it's broken in the sense that it kind of is super oppressive in one way, and then super weird and sluggish and doesn't feel good to play in another way. And that's what I mean when you talk about the ground control, air control, and then compare it to the grounded aerials, which is weird, right? It has ground control, it has air control, but when you combine the two, it feels terrible. So, yeah, that's what I mean by it's kind of weirdly broken. I would like to see some tweaks, and by tweaks, like, I don't mean direct nerfs, right? Because I am saying, yeah, ground game could use some nerfs, maybe aerial juggle game could use some nerfs, but the grounded aerials would be a huge buff. It would add more options to the weapon, because right now you are limited. So overall, I'm not sure if that would be a nerf. I think it's just a tweak to how it would be played, and I think it would be a much healthier, more fun way to play and play against it. Because I think it adds more counterplay to the ground game if there is more recovery time, or at least more limited options you can do after a whiff. Because right now, after whiffing, you are just free to do whatever. And then air game, getting down, it enables you to basically play against what its designed weaknesses are more effectively. So right now, you can see the weakness, but if the Greatsword user is good, you really can't take advantage of it, or at least it feels like that. It feels like that when I'm playing Greatsword. Like, my opponents can't really do much about what I'm doing. But yeah, those are my proposed ideas and stuff like that. Please don't harass anyone at BMG to do things, because that is not very cool. And I'll see you in the next video.